All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Quarantini Hour. And this week, actually, I guess it's a cocktail, but this is actually a Quarantazarac.
Quarantazarac.
A Quarantazarac. Hold on a second. Let me just test it. Oh, baby, that's really, really good. There are many of you watching who won't have a clue what I'm talking about. And I think, based on recent form, there's going to be lots of questions saying, what's in a Quarantazarac? What is a Quarantazarac? Is it a Quarantini? Does it merit inclusion in the genus Quarantini? And yes, it does. But I think I'm going to leave it to the people from New Orleans in the comments page to answer any questions for those people who live outside of Orleans Parish or Jefferson Parish or St. Bernard Parish that might not know what a Quarantazarac actually is. So I won't answer that question, but New Orleanians can answer that for anybody that's curious. Hold on, let me just have another sip just to make sure it's as good as I think it is. Hold on. I think it's really good. I might have to have another couple of sips later on just to make sure. All right, well, here we go. Well, here we are in Quarantini land. This is kind of weird, huh? But it's nice that there are people out there. I presume there's people out there listening to it. I might just be talking to myself.
No, there's people.
There are people. There's questions. There's some questions, yeah.
Okay. Frederick Reason says, can you walk us through the chords and theory behind Sometimes I Wonder? I would love to know how you think about those changes.
All right. Well, actually, Sometimes I Wonder is a song I wrote and had going around my head for years before I actually finished all the words up. And we worked it up at a rehearsal with the Monster Gents. And it's a chord progression I'm very fond of, I must say, because it's there's a lot of mathematical logic at work here, which is pleasing to me. But this is always the challenge with this, because I want to be able to explain some of these concepts, these musical concepts, to people who don't play music. Rather than give an answer to the people who are already musicians and leave lots of other people out. So I guess the first thing I do is just play you some of it. It's an R&B tune, it's in G minor. Maybe I should transpose it if I'm going to sing it. 'Cause it's kind of weird doing this when I don't have a chance to warm my voice up. Anyway. Sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, what in the world I'm gonna do without your sweetness and your completeness. I'm lost without you. I see trouble in my life at times, but I won't let it change my mind. Still it sleeps not peaceful dreams of mine, but sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, people, sometimes I wonder, wonder, oh, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder. All right, that's a brief version of the song. There's a lot in there, so I don't have time to do the whole thing, because I could talk all night just about those changes. But okay, here goes. The song is in G minor. Whenever you hear musicians talk about minor keys, they're, in layman's terms, sad keys. This is a sad chord. This is not a sad chord. This is G major. It's kind of neutral. It's not necessarily a happy chord. But when you change one note, that one, and make it one note lower, you flatten it, in other words, all of a sudden, that chord is imbued with melancholy, and no one really knows why, but it just is. I mean, everyone universally feels that somehow. So you can add certain flavors to that. So in this case, I add this flavor here, and then I put the bass heavy on this, two fingers playing G an octave apart. So it's a G minor with a seventh note, so that's called G minor 7, that's the name of the chord. Now, every minor chord has what's called a relative major. That is a major chord that contains lots of the same elements, and in this case it's B flat major. And if you listen to these two chords, you'll see. It's B flat major, fairly happy, robust, cheerful chappy, and then here the same notes but phrased slightly differently, and it's G minor. And what this song does, it alternates between the two so that you don't really know which key it's in, and it goes, the chord progression goes like this. And what you're essentially doing is hopping between G minor as the tonic, as the root chord, the home chord, and B flat is playing with the listener's ears a little bit. And man, you know what, to really talk about this would take so long that I think we might end up putting everybody to sleep. But that's a start, and maybe that's something I should do later on, is dedicate an entire song to, or half, entire one of these martini, not martini, I just gave it away, did I? Quarantine hours. It's not a martini. So I can go into some greater length, but it's to do with careful selection of chords that ease the ear around the changes, which is what all good songs do anyway, but basically confusing the ear so that you don't really know whether it's in B flat or G minor. I don't know, that's a really good explanation I just did, but as I say, just one of these chord changes you could talk about for hours. Anyway, what else? Other questions are coming up?
Well, this is a question from earlier from your niece Purdy, who sent it in.
Oh, Purdy.
But now they're probably sleeping, so maybe they'll watch it
They're
tomorrow.
in London, so if they've got any sense, they'll be fast asleep by now.
Yeah. So Purdy's question is, where do you start when writing a song, with words or with music?
Well, writing a song is not, that's a really good question, Purdy, and that's a question that a lot of people have asked me. And the answer is that sometimes I start with the music and sometimes I start with the words, but quite often there'll be a line that comes to me as a melody and a lyric at the same time. For example, the one I was just playing, I can actually use this to illustrate a little bit more so I can give the person that asked the previous question a bit more information.
Can I interrupt you because somebody's asking Anthony Vitale is asking a shout out on the chord progression.
On the chord progressions? Yeah. For Sometimes I Wonder? Yeah. Okay. Well, this song, I think, I can't remember how I wrote it. It was a long time ago, but I think the idea of sometimes I wonder, sometimes I wonder, what I'm gonna do. The melody came and the thing came all at the same time, and then the rest of the song follows around it. And in this instance, the first chord is G minor, and then this chord is B flat, but it's a B flat 7th, but it's also got extra stuff going on too. It's got a 6 added, and it has this thing which is makes a suspended chord. So it's a B flat with an A flat, C, E flat and a G, and that chord has a loaded message because you know it's got tension built in, it needs to release, and it needs to release by going here. See that? It's called a dominant chord. Dominant chords have to give way ultimately to the subdominant chord. So that's G minor, B flat, sus, to an E flat major 7th, and a 9. C minor, this one's a juicy A flat seventh, with a 9, with a flat 5 and a 6. And then followed by another juicy one, which comes out of the blue. You don't know where that one's coming from, but you've got a feeling it's going somewhere. It's loaded, and it does. It goes, and it just keeps on going. And now an E flat major 7th to a D 7th, raised 9, flat 9. Sometimes when you're doing chord progressions, the secret is to change some notes, but have some notes that stay the same. The subsequent chord shares. Like that. This note. To come up with an idea behind it. Quite often a lyric will suggest a kind of mood, something jaunty or something sad or something romantic or wistful, and then you play wistful chords, or you play something bouncy that kind of supports the lyrical idea. Lyrics and music should kind of go together. It's kind of odd when they don't, and sometimes it's kind of good when they don't. All right.
Ready for more?
Yeah.
Tom Pragliola says, can you tell me anything about the song Bad News?
Bad news. Where did I write bad news? Bad news this morning. I think I was watching.
No.
Well, I just think I kind of was watching the news, and it just all seemed to be bad news. And I realized that it's bad news is what gets your attention. Good news often doesn't make the headlines. If something disastrous happens, and everybody wants to know about it. And I don't really write songs like this usually, but hold on, let me get the guitar out, because this is a guitar song. Bad news was, like I said, I don't really usually write songs like this, and but anyway, it made the point that sometimes when terrible stuff happens, it's all over the news. Everybody watches, and it's a bit of a cynical observation, but that's what kind of sells a lot of advertising for. There's money in dramatic news. So, but the music was. This morning, I don't want to get you all down. Sweep it back under the rug, y'all. Let's make like it never went down. Whoa, good news. Seems like it don't want to come my way. I'm scared to wake up in the morning, make a start on a brand new day. Oh, bad news. Getting so tired of just singing the blues. I don't want to hear about a thing going wrong. I'd rather be singing my joyful song. That's a little taste of it. So that's kind of a little funk tune. But we play it on the gig, but sometimes I feel like I haven't quite finished writing it yet. That's why we haven't recorded it. I think there's some better lyrics I can squeeze in some of the verses. Some of these songs, when you write them, they don't get finished for years. You can have 99% of the song done, and there's just one thing that drives you crazy. And often you're under pressure to record them, so you record them, and then about a year after recording them, you find that lyric. There's one song I wrote called "Oh No No No," and there's a line. I couldn't stop now, even if I wanted to. Fell out of control all on account of you. You just set the spark that set my soul on fire. I'm crawling from the wreckage of the club Desire. That last line is the line I should have sung. And it came to me because there used to be a building. They just knocked it down about 6 months ago. I read about this place called the Club Desire, and it was right near where the old Desire Projects used to be, which was a rough part of New Orleans, very dangerous part of New Orleans when I first got here. You never go anywhere near it. It was kind of off limits. But back in the day, in the 1940s, they had a glitzy nightclub there, and it fell into disrepair. And by the time I actually got in my car and drove out and found out and did some research online and found the original address for it, I went down there, and there it was. There was this ruined club, and the doors were all smashed in, and the roof was caving in. And I crawled inside and stood in the place where Fats Domino used to play, and where many of the black R&B bands and jazz bands and orchestras in the 1950s used to play. I think back in the 1940s even. And it had been a really swanky place, but I stood in the ruins, and then I looked at the roof and thought, man, this place is going to fall down any second. So I crawled out, and as I did, crawling from the wreckage of the Club Desire, and there was the lyric for this song, but too late because I'd already recorded it. I can't remember what it was I sang on the original, but I don't think it was very good. I think it was like a throwaway line.
Something about the flames.
Something about flames and
going
fire
higher.
or something.
Yeah.
Anyway. So there you go.
Okay.
All right, next
Here's
question.
one. Michael Mars says, can you please explain about your approach to harmonically enhancing basic blues or R&B chord progressions like 1-4-5 with chord extensions, etc.? Thanks.
Okay, that's a really good question. And I'll try not to be too long-winded about it, but when you have a song consists of obviously a lyric, a melody, and a series of chords, which are put together in an arrangement. And chords can be voiced and played in a number of different ways, in an infinite number of ways. Challenge, when it gets interesting, is when you consider how you get from one chord to the next. And in blues tunes, you're given the opportunity to introduce some very interesting elements. It's a bit like cooking metaphors are always good in music because you can add spices to an otherwise basic meal and bring the flavors alive. And you can do that too in blues. So, for example, if you were playing, there's a song called, let me see if I know what the right good key is. Drowning My Own Tears, for example. It's a Ray Charles tune. Well, now it brings a tear. So here are the basic chords. It brings a tear into my eyes when I begin to realize, which is all good, nothing wrong with that. But let's look at the very first bit. It brings a tear into my eyes. Okay, so you can get moving straight away and start changing some of these notes. It brings a tear. Look at that. What happened there? You just, instead of going ugly, basic, not very interesting. Instead of this, I'm going, adding this note and changing this note. Whoa, and that's all of a sudden loaded with information because now you've set up tension which has to be released. If you don't release it properly, you're letting the listener down. And the listener will come back to hear more of what you're doing if you please them, if you treat them right. Because now this wants to go, you're doing two things. This is going, and this is going, sorry. And this is going. These are all three notes that are dropping a half step. That's compared to, see how they're just night and day. So it brings a tear into my eyes. Here's a passing progression. And it's got to go there. So instead of going, it brings a tear into into my eyes. When I begin, how we're doing, it brings a tear into my eyes. When I begin. All right, so that's lovely. You could just leave it like that and there'd be nothing wrong with it. But I like going even further. So it brings a tear into my eyes. When I begin to realize now. Listen to that. And you've got a diminished chord in the left hand. And by doing this, now you're playing a B chord, which doesn't even really belong in there anyway. There's no way that really fits in, but it does. And it does because of what came before and what comes after. So now these notes want to go, they want to go here, and this one wants to go here. So you got. So blues, there's an infinite number of ways of doing it. I've spent half a century learning about the spices you can use when cooking music, and it's great fun. But you know, there's a whole bunch of them, and that's just the first 2 bars. You got a whole, so you do that through the whole song, and you can dig deep, and that's why it's fun when you play these songs, because every time you do them, it's different. It's like every time you cook a meal, you might grab a bit more pepper, or you might get a bit more salt, or a bit less salt, or no salt at all. And then, so I mean, I've never played the same song twice the same way, because I never learnt at school reading music. I don't play music from a chart. I learnt by ear and taught myself pretty much. Every time you're playing, you're not just playing a song, but you're actually composing an arrangement within certain preset boundaries. Anyway, hope that answers part of the question.
Well, that's a really good segue.
Oh, it is?
All right, so this is actually 3 questions that I think you can probably tackle all together. 2 of them are from Josh Friend, and 1 is from Finn, your nephew, who sent it in earlier. So,
Yeah, Finn.
So Finn says, what makes something funk? Josh Friend says, what goes through your arranging process when you cover a meter song and make it your own? And then he also asks, can you please try to explain what makes music funky?
Okay. Well, you know, the what makes music so special is that it engages a part of your brain in a certain way that nothing else does. It's strange. No one really understands what goes on with music. All you're doing when you play a note, if I play this note here, it hits the string on this piano, and that string vibrates at 440 times a second. And so it vibrates, and columns of air come through very instantly and jiggle your eardrums, and you hear it in your head. Okay, that's basically what happens with one string. When you play a bunch of notes, if you play them right and choose the right ones, it invokes a response, and no one really knows why. And you can be moved to tears by music if it's played, if it's composed beautifully and played beautifully. But the whole point is it exists in a realm beyond the limitations of language. So when we use adjectives to try and describe music, or labels to try and describe music, for musicians, the problem is that those labels and adjectives and descriptions, the studio one time needed, this is the story as it was told to me. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I kind of believe that it's true. And I think it might have been Earl Palmer, the famous funky drummer from New Orleans. Was in the studio, and someone needed a certain thing they weren't getting from the drums. And the guy said, what is it? What do you want? What do you want? And he said, I don't know what it is, but he said, make it more funky. And that time, where funky had nothing to do with music, this is a long time ago, Funky was something that smelled bad. Like if you'd been wearing the same pair of socks for a week and you took them off and waved them in the air, you go, ooh, boy, that smells funky. Not good. But in a musical context, you wanted your music to generate that same kind of response, like, ooh, what is that? So funk is a very loose adjective that describes a certain kind of attitude in the playing of the music and in the response you get, or the response you have when you hear it and the way you feel. And if you ask musicians to define what's funky, then I would say, like all music, it's a combination of harmony, and there's a combination of harmony and rhythm. And rhythm is really, really important here. So generally speaking, music that people dance to has to conform to a certain pattern that repeats, so people can dance and not forever being thrown out of whack by different time changes and whatever. So 4 beats to a bar is the most common thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom, gak, boom, gak, boom, gak, boom, chuk, boom, eek, boom, eek. That's not very funky. Boom, geek, goom, gink, goom, gink, goom, geek. That's pretty boring. If you went boom, kick, boom, boom, kick, boom, boom, kick, boom, boom, chicka, boom, boom, but boom, back, boom, boom, back, boom, that's where what you're doing really is putting a lot of emphasis on the odd notes of a rhythm instead of on the even notes of the rhythm. So much that it almost starts feeling like it's a bit backwards.